Hall & Wilcox acknowledges the traditional custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded. We pay our respects to their elders, past and present, and to all First Nations people joining us today.
Hello and welcome to our podcast series, Exploring Philanthropy. In this series, we're going to provide you with an overview of philanthropic giving, what it involves, what the options are, and why it has become such an important part of the lives of many Australians. We'll be joined throughout the series by other experts from our Hall & Wilcox team and other guests with some experience and insight in this space. My name is Juliet O'Brien and I'm a Senior Associate at Hall & Wilcox. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Todd Bromwich, a Special Counsel in our tax practice. And in today's episode, the first in our podcast series, we're going to focus on the options for individuals when it comes to giving. Typically in the private client team, which I'm a part of, we deal with options for philanthropy via the estate plan. So that's dealing with their options when a person dies. But Todd, I understand the tax team's focus is a bit broader and you look at philanthropy both during a client's lifetime and after death.
Thanks for having me, Juliet. And you're right. So in the tax team, we have a pretty broad focus when it comes to philanthropy and our work with charities and donors. Our focus is more on lifetime giving, just because that's what our client base, we find they typically prefer. And some of them will look towards the philanthropic giving through the estate plan, and that's where we'll hand them over to you. But if it's during the lifetime, we focus on giving advice on what's the most appropriate structure to meet their philanthropic goals at that time. And then we also do the setup work. Now, there's not usually a lot of legal needs that come along once the structures are set up, at least not for these private charitable foundations, where we're looking at institutional charities. They have greater needs and we might stay involved. But otherwise, we then hand off to other advisors to help them manage and administer these structures ongoing.
So as I understand it, Todd, the most common of the charitable structures that we deal with or that your practice sees is the PAF or the private ancillary funds. But as I understand it, there are many more options. Are you able to give us a quick overview of the key options that are available to our clients?
Yeah, so typically there are a lot of options. And I can't go through all of them today, or we'll just sit here just listing the different options and their key features. But typically we break it up into two categories. We've got your giving charities and we've got doing charities. So the giving charities, they really have a focus on receiving money, holding and investing that money, and then providing funding to other charities and other charitable causes. So the majority of them are closely controlled private structures, but they could also be public fundraising bodies. And the vast majority of those, I'd say, in my experience, probably 99% of them, they're set up as charitable trusts. And you can have different forms of charitable trusts. And the most common one you've just mentioned, that is the ancillary fund. So private ancillary funds, public ancillary funds, the key difference is the public ancillary funds focus on public fundraising, whereas the private ancillary funds are kind of closely controlled charitable bodies that are usually set up for an individual or family, but their whole purpose is receive donations in, hold and invest the money, give the money out to other charities. Now, we can compare that to the doing charities. They're the ones who are out there doing the boots on the ground, charity work, getting their hands dirty. The larger ones that we see out there, those welfare charities, they're typically companies and usually companies limited by guarantee. But the smaller charities that might do more local or state-based operations, they're often incorporated associations. And what's most appropriate for the client, whether it's a giving charity or a doing charity, and where they fall within that category, that's really, it's horses for courses. It depends on their circumstances, depends on their intentions, and it's a bit of a balancing act.
Is it common, Todd, for clients to ask why they should consider establishing a charitable trust? I mean, what are the advantages for a client?
Yeah, and that is a common question we get. I already give to charity, can't I just keep doing it? And I mean, most of the clients that come to us, they're already considering a structured giving option. And for some of them, direct giving might still be the most appropriate option. So if you know exactly who you want to give to, and you know how much you want to give to and when, and you have a lot of flexibility around that, then direct giving to charities might still be the most appropriate option for you. But for others, structured giving might be more attractive. And so during your lifetime, there are a few considerations there. For example, with a PAF, the Private Ancillary Fund, you can make a big donation up front and claim a tax deduction for that, which can be claimed in that year or spread across 5 years. And that we see that often with clients who they have, great charitable intentions, but they have a massive tax bill in that year. They want to manage that and bring it down so that they can achieve their philanthropic intentions, but also get the tax benefit out of that. And then that PAF can then feed that money out to other charities year on year. And that allows for changing priorities. So direct giving, that's where you know where the money needs to go and you want to give it now. Whereas a PAF lets you kind of time that out and spread it over different years and create an ongoing legacy. And it does allow for a bit more flexibility in where your money goes over time. When you have a philanthropic structure, you can also get, typically I find, some better engagement from charities where they are getting more savvy in how they deal with foundations as opposed to individuals. And you can get some better direct engagement with them, i.e. involvement in their projects, and also clearer and more comprehensive reporting on how the money's being used. And another one is it allows clients to establish a bit of a living legacy. You can establish this foundation during your lifetime, potentially in your family name, and you can get, the next generation and the generation below that involved in the foundation formally or informally, directors, or they can just be involved in discussions on where the money goes. And it's a good way to tie philanthropy into the fabric of the family. Now, they're all factors that that need to be considered when we're talking about establishing a philanthropic structure during your lifetime. Obviously, if we're talking about giving through the estate plan, it's a bit different, but I'm sure you know well, Juliet, that some of those same considerations can apply. If you have a whole lot of money that you want to go to one particular charity or a few different charities, then great, direct giving and X, Y, and Z amount going to A, B, and C charities, that might suit you perfectly. But if you want to create a structure that will provide that ongoing legacy for years after your death, then a charitable structure might be more appropriate.
And I'm finding that clients quite often will set up a PAF during lifetime, but it becomes quite a useful vehicle to be able to leave funds or assets to that PAF in the estate plan. So it might well have a targeted aim during lifetime, but it's a really useful vehicle to have there if a gift can be made from the will to that PAF.
Yeah, and I think those clients who do want to give via their estate via a PAF, it is good for them to see this foundation in operation during their lifetime. If they do have some available capital to set up the PAF and fund it during their lifetime, it is great for them to see that PAF doing its work and getting involved and up and running during your lifetime, so you can see what your money is being put towards, and you can just see it in operation.
Yeah. So what are the key decision drivers, Todd, in deciding what the most appropriate charitable structure might be?
As I mentioned before, it's a bit of a balancing act. So there's a few key decision drivers, and the first one, and one of the most common ones that people ask when they come to us, is, am I going to get a tax deduction for donating money into this structure? So getting a tax deduction during your lifetime, and what we call that is when a charity is, when you get a tax deduction for donating to a charity, that charity is called a DGR, or a deductible gift recipient. Now, that's something that has to be approved by the ATO, and there's strict eligibility criteria. So not all charities are DGRs. There's the vast majority of charities in Australia, you do not get a tax deduction for donating to them. Now, the other side of that is upon death, if if you've got bequests of capital gains tax assets that are going to non-DGR charities, there can be some tax payable there. Now, in Australia, we don't have estate taxes or death duties, but that's one case where there might be some tax payable. So that's a really key question that we have coming up in these discussions. Another one is use of funds. So, for example, do you want to fund other charities, or do you want to fund more grassroots local causes or potentially overseas organisations? Or alternatively, do you want to have conduct more hands-on charitable activities? Do you want to get your hands dirty and do those charitable works that you would otherwise be funding? Another one is control over the structure. So there might be a preference for tight family control over this structure. You want this to be a family controlled charitable foundation, or maybe it's the type of organisation that you would rather have more public input and control into its management and administration. And some of these structures require that. Some of these structures, particularly if you're wanting DGR status for the structure, it will generally involve some degree or varying degrees of public control at a board level. And the final one that comes up is ease of administration. So some of these structures, for example, PAFs or non-deductible gift recipient charitable trusts, they're relatively easy to administer. But when we start getting into those larger kind of active doing charities, there's more administration involved, there's more compliance involved, and it becomes a bit more of a task to manage them. These are all things that we weigh up. There's a whole lot of other things. For example, how does it fit in with your broader family dynamic and the plan? And do you have a business? Do you want it to fit in with the business? It's a pretty broad and wide-ranging discussion when we have these meetings with clients.
So there's a lot of factors to consider. How do clients make their way through all this detail and decide what's best for them?
So that's where we really can help and provide some value up front for these clients, because it is pretty easy to get lost in the detail, particularly when you don't have experience yet. This is your first time actually getting involved in structured giving. In the majority of cases, the good news is there's usually one structure that is the most appropriate. Once we have these discussions, we figure out what are the priorities. There's usually one that we can land on pretty easily, or we can say, we can achieve most of what you want here, and maybe you're going to have to consider something on the side as well. And so if that's the case, we can work with clients to figure out what's truly important to you. What are the key drivers here that are the non-negotiables for you, and what's just a nice to have? And we can develop a solution that's more tailored to their needs. And sometimes that means giving up some flexibility in the structure in favour of it having DGR status, if that tax deduction, that financial incentive or disincentive is really important to them. Or the inverse, you might have a client who is willing to give up access to that DGR status in favour of a more flexible structure. For example, where they have a lot of capital, there's no real tax liabilities year on year or expected future tax liabilities. They might be happy to just fund a non-DGR structure and have a bit more flexibility over the use of the money once it's in that structure.
Well, being able to offer donors a tax deduction is a pretty big advantage for a charity. Do you find that many clients are willing to do that?
Yes and no. I mean, it depends on the circumstances. There are a range of different ways to fund these charitable structures in a tax effective way. The easiest way is obviously if the structure has DGR status and you can claim a tax deduction for donations of cash and certain donations of property to the organisation. But if that's not achievable, if we're talking about, for example, a non-DGR charitable trust, there are other alternatives that can be considered, and we can work with those clients to develop some more bespoke arrangements. But yeah, in most cases, the clients want to opt for the simplicity that comes with DGR status. They don't want to worry about, that additional complexity.
So you mentioned that there are some changes on the horizon for charities and the not-for-profit space. Can you give us an idea of what to expect?
Yeah, so I think the government and also the ATO and ACNC, so that's the tax office and the charities regulator, they've been really working hard over the past at least 5 years, but it goes back longer than that. They've been working hard to improve the work they're doing with charities and improve the regulation of charities. The most recent thing is, the new government a couple of years ago said that one of their goals was to double charitable giving by Australians by 2030. Now, I'm not sure what goes into the numbers there, but there was a recent Productivity Commission report that recommended a whole lot of changes to help spur on the growth of the sector that the government was looking for. And the government is committed to implementing a majority of those recommendations, almost all of them. Now, there are a few different changes there. I wouldn't say it's widespread reform, but the key thing to note is that the government's proposing to open up access to the DGR status, so that many more charities will be deductible gift recipients, and they're looking to simplify the system a bit. So it should make it a lot easier for many charities to raise funds from the public, because they'll be able to tell donors, yes, you will get a tax deduction if you donate this money or certain property to me. And so hopefully it should spur on a lot more giving in the sector, but we'll just have to wait and see.
Well, that's good news. Well, look, that brings us to the close of what we wanted to talk about today. As I said, we're going to have a few podcasts in this series which will concentrate on some different aspects. So please look out for those. But thanks for listening today. As always, please get in touch if you've got any questions, and you can find our details on our website, which is at hallandwilcox.com.au, or connect with us on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed today's episode, then rate, review, or follow our podcast wherever you get your podcast. Thank you, everyone.
This podcast is not legal advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should always obtain legal advice about your specific circumstances.